Hey, morning, Adrian. To be having this chat with you.
Likewise. And to begin with, could you help the audience to better understand a bit about your background and the company that you're with?
Cool. So my name is Mao Gen, and I head up the Qualtrics Southeast Asia operation. And Qualtrics as an organization, our mission is to help improve human experience, closing experience gaps, improving human experience. That's the vision of the company.
And could you help us to define better what do you mean by human experience? What are the typical example of human experience that we'll be looking at from a company perspective?
Sure. I mean, if you think about a company, there are different experience. They deal with different stakeholders, right? So usually the two main stakeholders are their customers and their employees. So for example, an interesting example would be employees, right? We are all employees of our organization and we have expectations of what the organizations provide to us to do our job, to make it fun, right? So that is the expectation and that's the experience the organization provides to us. And there's always a gap, right? Because the expectations always supersedes the reality, because as you give more, the employees, as human beings, we expect more, right? And there's always a gap. And obviously, organizations need to continuously close that gap, right? To ensure that their employees are being motivated and they want to understand exactly where is the most meaningful thing to close, because no organization have unlimited resources.
So from HR or even from a supervisor perspective, what are some of the data points or some of the indication that we can infer to give us a sense whether the employees feel engaged or not?
I think that there's a interesting challenge that we, as HR practitioners or business leaders like myself, we constantly need to kind of deal with, right? The recent movement in talent and is certainly a big challenge, and obviously managing the shift of work is also a big challenge, right? So I think where we see from the research perspective is, it reinforces our belief that the regular listening, understanding, and more importantly, acting on those feedback is really important, right? Because different people are going through different phases, right? Like for myself, I'm maybe having some renovation. For somebody else in my team, the kids are at home, and for someone else, traveling to office is a long journey and they're so used to working from home is a lot more productive. So I think right now the view is really to understand employees at a very individual level, listening to them and being able to respond to their needs as individually as possible is going to help change that. So yeah, I think the key will be regular listening and to be able to help managers like myself have the right data to understand what are the key drivers within my team, which is going to be unique from somebody else.
And of course, in getting all those data in, it would also be quite a challenge, especially if the team is extremely large or maybe even cross-boundary or cross-country. So what are some of the means and ways which, of course, Qualtrics can facilitate in making that much easier? Otherwise, I would imagine it could become a daily chore. Just listening to someone could take up half a day, and then I'm only left with half a day to do my job.
I mean, we have to remember at the end of the day, we run the business, and this part of the role is part of the role, but it's becoming more and more important, I think, in the current context, right, where the war for talent has become a lot more intense. So how we should think about this is really looking at the employee journey rather than thinking about a point in time, right? Because a point in time, depending on where an employee is at that point of time, is going to be different, right? So taking a step back, as I earlier said, right, look at the overall kind of scorecard view, right, on different aspects of the drives employee engagement, well-being, to look at it from the employee journey. So not just a point in time once a year or once every 3 months, but think about it from employee journey, just like we are customers, right? When we walk into a prelude to the coffee shop experience, on when I do my booking, to what's on the menu, to how I might service at the shop itself, no different from the employee, right? In terms of us attracting them to join the company, how do we onboard them, how do we train them, how do we have career conversations with them, what does their growth looks like. All of those things, having that data being listened to constantly, allowing the employee to have that channel to provide feedback along the way as they deem fit, and obviously leveraging technology to crunch and all that data and provide a business person like myself and say, okay, in your team, these are the hotspots that you need to look for as a leading indicator of potential employee dissatisfaction.
And across all the different, and I can imagine hundreds of different companies that you guys have been working with and are still working with, what are some of the common employee engagement initiatives that you're seeing across your different customers?
The spectrum of customers that we work with actually really varies, right? From some who are first time starting to think about doing an engagement, Obviously, we guide them in terms of what questions they should be asking, when they should be asking. To I think the slightly more mature ones are already doing the engagement, and maybe adding more regular pausing to it, and they are also starting to think about employee journey, right? Say, right, the moments that really matters, right? A post-performance conversation with the manager is a very important moment for the employee, right? In terms of, do they feel like it was a fair conversation, and did they get value out of the conversation, right? Things like this. So the slightly more mature ones are kind of combining moments that matter with engagement and pulse to get a more holistic view. And I think there are a handful, I would say, that really kind of at the frontier where they actually bring in customer experience data, joining with the employee experience data, and really trying to move the needle on both fronts with their actions. Because there is a fair amount of new research that's coming up that's showing that correlation between how an employee experience is driving better customer experience, or how a poor customer experience actually creating dissatisfaction in employee experience, right? So more and more research is coming out there trying to see the correlation.
You reminded me of something that Richard Branson mentioned in his book, and I think it's an adage that he practiced in Virgin Group, which is you just have to take care of your employees, and the employees naturally will take care of the customer. So for him, it's always employee first, customer second, or rather, for the employee, customer will be first lah.
All great companies, you think about the best brands in the world, right? I mean, obviously Virgin Airlines being one of them, but you think about Apple, you think about Google. I mean, the big brands that are known for their branding. I think if you look at each of them, the way they are focused on employee experience is really high, right? In terms of because the belief is there's no successful company without employees. That's the heart of it.
So we have touched on quite a fair bit on the company side. Now, given that there's two sides of the coin, and the other equation will be on the employee aspect, it may be quite apparent for some, but maybe it would be great to just put it out there. What are some of the personal benefit? And what's the benefit for an employee of being actively engaged in the company?
I think yes. Sometimes there is that mindset, right? And it's who owns employee experience? Is it organization or is it employees? And honestly, the answer is both, right? Both has to play a part, because as much as the organization can keep focusing on giving out the best employee experience, the employees need to take ownership for this to work, right? Like it's like a marriage. What's the benefit for the employees? Clearly, there are a few things, right? Well, in our study, we have seen the highly engaged employees, they always have a lot more sense of self-fulfillment. Means when they go to work and they come out of work feeling that they have achieved something, it builds their own confidence, builds their own self-esteem, and clearly that obviously leads to much better things in their own career, right? Because as they perform, they will obviously have more opportunities in career and development path, right? And so that is the personal benefit of really enjoying work versus just going to work for the payslip.
Of course, for employees, not many of them, or maybe there's a small portion of them, they may not be in either of very enlightened companies that you're working with. So for those who are still facing some resistance, especially companies that are taking a very backward approach when it comes to employee engagement, are there things that they can do at the workplace to try to move the needle forward or try to inch forward in order to encourage some form of engagement, or just like what you said, try to make life better for themselves?
It really starts with the organization and the leadership. I think that's where the tone gets set, and that's how the culture gets set, right? So I think organizations or leaders or business owners need to really kind of first understand and appreciate that employee experience is a very important part of their business, regardless of whether a service industry or their manufacturing industry. The belief that employees is the heart of everything for every successful company, right? So that mindset from the leadership is most important, and that sets the culture. And the leaders will then have to create environments within their company which allows for honest, open feedback without judgment, right? And they need to create an environment that allows for empowerment, autonomy, where employees provide feedback and they get heard, they get action. And it becomes a vicious cycle of everybody trying to do good. So the more you allow them to contribute, they see that their contribution is making an impact, the more they will give. And that it becomes a vicious cycle. So certainly it starts with the leaders, creating the environment, and then obviously communicating what it means for the employees individually.
Given my history in dealing with HR professionals, I always understand that the key challenge for them in rolling out any form of new initiative, especially something which is a bit more modern, is trying to convince the business line and the business leaders on the ROI. So and you mentioned rightly that takes two hands to clap, and company has to play a huge part. So for company leaders that are still sitting on the fence when it comes to employee engagement, do you have any form of data, especially on the kind of ROI they can expect when they have an actively engaged workforce?
Certainly, I mean, there's a lot of research out there, right, that shows that highly engaged employees perform better and a lot more productive, right? There's a ton of data out there. So I mean, for organizations who are looking at ROI, I mean, for employee experience, there's both a strategic view of things and there is that business case ROI side of things, right? There are different levers that you can look at. So for example, if an organization, depending on their business problems or problem statement in HR, right? Is it attraction of talent is a challenge? Then if they are unable to attract talent, how does that impact growth? Or is retention a problem? Which is, if they are productive employees are leaving, how does that impact productivity? And again, it's not difficult to connect that to, again, the impact to revenue, right? So those business cases are actually not too difficult to create. And at Qualtrics, we are happy to work with the business leaders to help them shape up what looks like a proper business case that fit their organization.
Right. And based on what you're seeing on day-to-day basis, what do you foresee to be some upcoming employee engagement trends?
Interesting. Obviously, with COVID coming, as we come out of COVID, I think there's a lot of new trends, right? I think that 2 years really forced a lot of changes in workplace, in organization, in how we operate. So a few interesting things are seeing, obviously. One is, as I already mentioned, kind of like companies are getting a bit more matured in their listening program to go beyond engagement and overall employee journey. Other moments that matters and bring it together. I think that's one. The second thing is really due to this remote hybrid work thing, right? So we are seeing a lot more HR cooperating with property and IT leaders to say, how do I optimize my physical and my digital workplace now, because now these two lines are getting blurred. And I think the third one, which I'm very encouraged, is there is a lot more focus I see in terms of well-being, sense of belonging. In the past, it's very much geared towards the organization and what it means for them. I think more and more so we're seeing organizations really also focusing on what's in it for the employees and where are they with their state of mental health. So I think those are the kind of, I would say, the top 3 trends.
And for companies that would be keen to kickstart employee engagement journey, what are some of your best advice you would like to give to them?
I think that's a good one. For somebody who's trying to kickstart a program, I think the first thing is understanding where the North Star is, right? What is the problem statement we are trying to achieve, right? So that we could build a point of view in terms of that business case, like you say, because most leaders will need to say, what am I going to get in return for these dollars I'm spending? 2, then is clearly understanding where some of the important listening posts are for that hypothesis of where they're trying to solve for. And then 3 is start active listening, but more importantly is to really communicate and share back and show that the actions are being taken, right? So that it will create a positive outcome with the employees. So I think those are the 3 things. And at Qualtrics, we will be certainly very keen to work with the organization to guide them along this journey.
And on the other spectrum, I'm very certain there may be some companies that have came to you after they've tried to, do it on their own and try to navigate things around. For those set of companies, have you seen any common mistakes or pitfalls that companies on their own tend to fall into, so that our listeners can also take reference from it and try to avoid the same pitfall?
I mean, there are certainly companies who kind of tried it themselves, because if you not into the HR frame and into the methodology, sometimes it looks like I'm just going to ask a few questions and collect data and I know what to do with it. But it's a lot more than that. There's a science behind this, right? And one of the things that Qualtrics recently developed in the midst of this COVID, right, is to surface up 25 different key drivers that really impact employee experience. So understanding what are some potential drivers, understanding how the questions should be asked and when to ask them is important. Data collection piece seems easy, but if that is done not correctly, frankly, you don't have good data to work on.
So it's not just a simple checkbox experience. It actually take into account the kind of motivation, as you mentioned earlier on, the North Star, and all this into play, which of course all tie back into the kind of performance or outcome that a company wish to achieve. And with that, thank you so much for coming onto the show. For people who may be keen to find out more about yourself as well as Qualtrics, where can they go to?
Qualtrics.com is where they could find, or search for Mao Gen on LinkedIn. You'll find me. There's not many out there.
All this will be added into the show notes. Mao Gen, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Lovely speaking with you, and I hope all your advice will be very interesting and useful for companies and listeners out there who's trying to embark and try to fine-tune and improve their own employee experience journey.
Thank you, Adrian, for the opportunity. We hope to help our listeners close the experience gaps as well.